Hey, everybody, welcome to a new episode of Walk in Faith. I'm excited to be sitting down with Camille and Emmanuel Kampouris. Emmanuel, I just want to thank you guys. I really enjoyed the film, like we were talking off camera. It was one of the most thought-provoking films, the film Bonhoeffer, which I hope I pronounced correctly. I just want to read this to you. I'm honest, I watched a lot of films this year, but what I really noticed about the film was the message of bravery and to stand up for what's right, but really to stand up for God's truth. And in the film, like it says, for such a time as this, when you were reflecting on the story, did you envision or think that his story would be so relevant in today's time, in today's culture, in today's history?
Well, originally, because we read the book by Eric Metaxas, the biography of Bonhoeffer in 2010, so that's many years ago, and that inspired us to make the movie. And when and we were talking about it with Camille and saying, okay, well, it'd be nice if this were made into a movie. And anyhow,
Yeah, I mean, the question, did we envision this? Because it was 12 years ago, we saw a couple things that are worse today. So it was timely then, more timely now. One of them, man, was, well, in Europe, for instance, at that time, we saw rising anti-Semitism.
anti-Semitism.
We thought, where is this coming from? And now, of course, we have it on our college campuses. But I think the main thing for us was his faith journey. So we saw a Western world 20 years ago, and certainly 12 years ago, that was walking away from God. I mean, if you really want to boil it down to the potatoes, the church is far from God in the West.
Oh,
Go to Europe a lot.
Europe as well.
Churches are empty.
Churches in some places in Europe are museums.
People
oh,
come
I
and
know.
take pictures, and here as well. Of course, there's always a remnant. Of course, God always has his people that love Jesus, and he is their first love. But we have a lot of lukewarm Christians, and so we saw that. We also saw a culture that was coarsening, and evil was coming out in places we never imagined, like on the internet. How the access to pornography. There was so much that we were seeing that we were horrified at, and then look where we are today. Much worse. So he is a hero for that kind of monstrous evil that can begin to grow in our world, and has begun to grow. And of course, at his time, it was full blown.
That's interesting. And like you said too about the museums and with churches, I seen a huge decrease. I mean, you could see it across the board in all churches, whether it's Catholic, Episcopal. I mean, there's such a decline in church attendance, and some people blame it on COVID. They can blame it on whatever, but we see that culture has really influenced and impacted this generation, and even the adults. I mean, I argue with parents all the time how they'd rather have their kids attend sports on Sunday than bring them to church. There's such a disconnect.
Wow.
And you're right. I mean, his story is so powerful. And one thing too, I just want to note, I just noticed something in the film, and I didn't read your bio till the end that you worked for Sesame Street. And when I just left Florence like a week ago, and Pinocchio is such a prominent figure. And when I saw Pinocchio in that first initial scene, I said to myself, why is Pinocchio there? It didn't work. And not that it didn't work, but it wasn't. I said, this isn't first, it's not, it's Florence. It was 1861. I'm like, so, and then he brought up Pinocchio again. So I was intrigued by that. Why did you pick Pinocchio out of all the characters that you've worked on, especially with Sesame Street?
Okay, so that's kind of like inside baseball in that
I knew that.
Bonhoeffer read Pinocchio when he was about 10, and he used to giggle and laugh when he was reading it. And his twin sister puts that in her memoirs. And of course, Pinocchio is about telling the truth. And Bonhoeffer is all about pointing people to Jesus, who is the truth. The truth is a person for a Christian. It's Jesus. And so there was more in the movie about Pinocchio. At the end, we brought it back. He sees a book and he starts to read that to the prisoners. But right now we have it because in the puppet theater, and when he's teaching the children in Harlem, he says, it's hard to be a real boy, to have compassion, to tell the truth. It's a lot easier to be a puppet, than a real person. So it's just a good theme.
Yeah, when I noticed that, I said that's very interesting. And then, like I said, when I when I read that your bio, and then you worked at Sesame Street. I said, oh, interesting, because I was curious about why
Yeah.
you selected Pinocchio. But no, I completely agree. And I think that was sort of the emphasis of the whole film. Throughout the film was all about telling the truth, standing up for what's right. And there was a part in the film, I had to stop it and I had to say to my wife and admit, and I think that's what I was saying earlier, like it's so thought-provoking. I had to ask myself this question when the bishop stood up to, the Third Reich, right? Or to
Yes.
the SS. And I
Yes.
said, he knew his fate. I mean, I don't want to
Yeah.
give away too much, but we know what happens, but he knew his fate. And I have to ask myself that question as a man, as a follower of Christ. Do I, am I willing to sacrifice my own life and my family's life for truly what I believe, right? We're asked to call to carry the cross, but a lot of us say, I'll carry it, but until it gets too heavy, I got to put it down. So then I ask myself, am I more afraid of man or God? And I had to stop the film and really ask, and that what it did is it sort of revealed something in my own heart and spirit that I already knew, that I don't think I'm strong enough. I don't think I'm strong enough as Bonhoeffer or the bishop if I was put in that situation.
Well, God has not given us a spirit of fear, as you know. He's given us, but power, love, and self-control. So, I mean, that's hopefully the Lord will help you. He has to be. He's the instrument for us to be courageous and stand up. We can't do it on our own strength. We have to rely on God in this case, I think.
And that's really the essence of this film. When we meet Bonhoeffer, he's a theologian. He goes to Harlem. He sees people who suffer, but they live their faith, and they could be lynched for it. And that is when he really said later, I went from being a theologian, had knowledge, to being a Christian. And the thing about Bonhoeffer is he's so deep. If you read any of his stuff, he didn't do any of this alone. He did it by increasingly spending time with God. And it says God has not, this verse that God has not given you a spirit of fear, but what is he giving you? He's giving you a spirit of power, love. But all of that is by walking with him, his love, his power in you.
But and I love the fact that I was able to stop the film. And I think that's what's going to happen with a lot of people that watch this movie, is to stop and reflect and ask ourselves those questions. Because like you said, Emmanuel, that's something I struggle with. But you're right. If I was put in that situation, I pray that God will give me the strength that I can lean on him and not, justify my actions and say I'm a sinner and he'll forgive me, but to really stand up for what's right. And we don't see that in society at all. I mean, I don't want to say overall, but there's a lot of people that stay quiet when things are happening, whether it's because it's not happening to them or affecting them directly, or because of fear of being ostracized or alienated. But we need to really stand up in a film like this. It sort of reawakes that feeling, or reminds us, or it pushes us to say, will I stand up in the eyes of fear, in the eyes of the enemy? Will I stand up for what's true, and which is Jesus Christ?
Well, that's why Emmanuel said you don't do it in your own strength. Because so if you start with the premise that the West is far from God, well, then of course what follows is not a lot of courage. People not speaking up. Silence becomes this cancer but if we, this is kind of a call to the church to come back to God. And the bishop that you mentioned, that's Niemöller, that's the bishop, he wasn't there, and then he gets there. Remember in the beginning of the movie, he's saying, let's not worry about the Jews now. We can get to that later. Right now, it's important to get to know our new leader, work with him.
That's exactly right.
And Dietrich was right away, which he had learned, we believe he had seen all that in Harlem. In Harlem he had seen, because he was there during segregation, right? So he sees no blacks allowed within a couple of years. And he actually says that line that we put in the movie. He actually writes it in a letter. He says, it's a good thing we don't have anything like this in Germany.
Yes,
on the steps, yeah. And of course, within 2 years, he sees now signs, no Jews allowed. So God prepares you. God was preparing him in Harlem, and God gives you all those tools that you're going to need.
And that scene is so powerful, especially that sign, all are welcomed, right? All are welcomed. And I think about that too as a follower of Christ, because we have to be honest, there are people that justify their actions and they call themselves Christians or followers of Christ, holding up signs and they're preaching, but then their actions and their words and their deeds are not in line. And sometimes we justify our actions and we call ourselves Christians. And I say to myself, is that really Christian-like? Is that really what God has called us to do? And I think we're seeing that. I don't want to say people are rewriting the Bible, because that is happening in other countries, but within the United States, I do see that people are justifying their actions to sort of fit within this new world. But we really need to peel it back to what God has called us to do. And I don't know. And I think this film is really, for me personally, it made me really reflect a lot on that.
Yeah. I think we're so comfortable in America as Christians. We just don't understand or know what might be required of us. And I don't know that the church is really prepared. I talk in general, the church at large. When Matt and I traveled a lot, and you see a much more vibrant faith. Of course, there's a remnant here. I don't ever want to talk against. There are wonderful, faithful people, but by and large, when you look at statistics, how many call themselves Christians? In places like Iran, growing.
Oh my God.
China
Yeah.
as well. So where persecution, when you have persecution, then the faith grows. I mean, it's just amazing. It's a catalyst for more people to go to Christ for their salvation, if you will. That's the only thing they have. So
Oh, that's a great point. I interviewed recently Iran Alive. You should look up that ministry. And they have the statistics on how many people from Iran, Iraq are coming to Jesus. And interviewing this man, I said to him, are you ever afraid of your life? And he said, yes, of course. At any point, they want to kill him because he speaks openly about his faith. And I think about how committed they are, right? They'll go to church if they can even find a church, or they build a church, or they plant a church, and they know that they might be killed. But yet, to get people to go to Mass on Sunday, which is 3 blocks from my house, is like, it's so challenging. I don't understand it. I showed a picture the other day of a church. You've probably seen it. The water is up to their knees, and they're in Mass praying and worshiping God.
Oh,
right?
wow.
And I can't get people to go to church because it's too early, it's too late, and baseball, football's on, whatever the excuse is. But I think you're right. And what do you think has changed in society or in culture within the church in general that has sort of created this sort of division or this justification why we don't need to participate or speak openly? Something has changed.
Well, we kind of think that Christianity in America is sometimes like a cult of niceness. Just be nice. Jesus was nice. And yet, if you read the scriptures, the gospel offends. I mean, if you look at Paul's life, he was, I don't know, beaten, I think, twice, scourged, I don't know how many times. He was stoned and left to be dead. He was shipwrecked. He was, he lists that thing, I was in danger from within, danger from that, danger from that. I mean, that's kind of, if you talk to someone in Iran, they'll say, yeah, that could happen. But God is so precious to them. Jesus is the pearl that you sell everything for. And I don't know that that's the case here in America when you're so comfortable. Right. Until you get that revelation, that encounter with Christ, when there's this great, if you're going to, I think in pictures, right? I think in movies, there's this great picture of Peter, he's cleaning his net. I think it's in Luke, and Jesus is preaching. He's just cleaning his nets. Then, after he pulls in a load of fish that he can't believe, and Jesus told him, throw your net up, then he bows down and he says, my Lord and my God. He had a revelation of who Jesus is. And I think, we hope this movie will start conversations and provoke people to follow, to search and to find.
He's a great role model, Bonhoeffer, for young and old, and what he did. This is what we hope this will inspire people, because he really was inspirational. He was a sportsman. He was a pianist. I mean, he multifaceted, great talent. But essentially, he was a great role model, and you can see that in when he built started the underground seminary in Finkenwalde. I mean, that's what it was, and he demonstrated that there. So I think that was the thing, the great courage, and was not afraid. I mean, he was just amazing.
Because he had this love and this passion for Christ. When he wrote Cost of Discipleship, one of his most famous lines is, when Jesus calls a man, or when Christ calls a man, he bids him come and die.
Die too.
I mean, so you're dying to yourself. You're dying to your, schedule, or to your selfishness. And And of course, he paid the ultimate price and died. But I think that's what the Iranian Christians you talk to, they understand that he is worth everything. And Jesus says, if you lose your life for my sake, you will find it. And that's where we as a church have to get to, you know, and then the rest follow, right? The courage, the lack of fear of man, that kind of follows from your passion.
I agree. And I think the film like this will, because I think we all have access to sort of that revelation, right? Because I had one in Fatima 15 years ago where my life completely changed. And I wasn't looking for it, I wasn't hunting for it, it just happened. And that has changed my life, the trajectory of my life. And I think if more people are open to it, I think there's opportunities for, you know, Jesus and God to speak to them, speak to their spirit, where they will have this sort of transformation. And it's films like this that really allow you to think and reflect and ask yourself those important questions. Because I believe, like, and I know you believe, the Holy Spirit will speak to us, will speak through us through projects like this. But like I said before, I'm creating a film too on Father Capodanno, and now I'm struggling with the producers and the distribution companies on how much of the story needs to be true. I want it to be exactly how it happened, but we know in Hollywood or in this business, right, there's give and take. So how much of the story of Bonhoeffer's story is accurate?
Well, first of all, you're absolutely right, and one of the reasons why, I mean, we just want to fund a script initially, and then give it over to Texas. They didn't make a movie.
Or anybody.
Anybody.
You know, it didn't have
But
to
then
be him.
when
It could have been an agent in Hollywood. We just said, let's at least get a script again.
And then
Why do we say so?
Because we wanted to make sure that, as you said, that it reflects the truth, and it's not because Hollywood would just take it over and just gut the faith, if you will, because they don't, you know, whatever. So you have no control over that. So in order to have control, we said let's carry on, and this is why we embarked on this journey, to make sure that the script reflects the true story. In fact, this, you know, essentially.
Well, now your second part is what is true in the script and what isn't, right? So the first thing is you get the story down that's true to the man, to his heart. As far as some of the details, we had to fudge on some of the details because we had to put, you know, a long life, and he was very deep. He did many things, wrote many books, went many places, and his spy stuff is very intricate. And we had to put it into 2 hours. So we did compress the time. So for instance, he did not, the jazz scene where he jams, that is not something that we read or that's factual. We don't know. Could it have happened? Absolutely. We know that he spent a year in Harlem. He kept going every Sunday, and he worked in the junior church.
You know,
and he made friends.
He taught the
taught in the junior church, yeah, and the children. And he made friends with Frank Fisher. They traveled together. We know all that. We know he was as good as a concert pianist, and people thought he was going to be a concert pianist. And we know he loved music, and he bought albums of Negro spirituals. And he went to clubs at night. He went to dinner. He went and spent time at night as well in Harlem, played basketball, you know, all kinds of things. So this is a film metaphor for us. And we
just that part of
that movie, that little bit of that scene.
You know, when he goes to the jazz club and stuff. So.
Because Harlem never left him. That faith that got into him, like Fatima, you had your revelation, that never left him. And the idea that, you know, what's the famous quote he says?
Silence in the face of evil is itself evil. Not to speak is to speak. Not to act is to act. I mean, these are famous statements. And
so he saw that in Harlem, you know. So that's a metaphor. We blended. Of course, we didn't make up the fact that he played the piano. He was a brilliant pianist. So, and then there are time things, like when he's in Harlem and we have the Gersdorf plot, the bomb plot. And I don't want to give too much away, but that didn't happen exactly that year. So that wasn't
timing, a bit of timing, but
you know, you stood true to the story. You
true to the story.
The Churchill thing, getting a bomb from that's actually not what he was asking for. They were asking for help from Churchill. All true, but we made it more specific. About, you know, sometimes you have to take a poetic license for a film, and you have to show, not talk, not tell. And so at the end, well, I don't want to spoil.
No, don't give away too much, because it's a film.
Yeah. So yeah, but anyway, he does yeah. Well, there are little things that are true, but maybe we added, you know,
make it more
embellish it.
cinematic.
That's okay, but to
Mhm.
gut things,
Yeah,
like Matt said,
yeah.
to
No, we were, I mean, I would say 90% of what you see there is a true story. Yeah, there's some embellishments and some poetic license, like especially like the jazz club and all that. But nevertheless, we presume it happened because he lived there. So you're making an assumption which could be correct, you see.
Yes, of course.
Music.
and he probably played in church because he was always playing music,
Yeah.
always playing the piano.
And I love that scene. I love that scene, the way he's welcome on stage, because, you know, like you said, I mean, Harlem was a very different place than what it is now. And to be welcomed with such open arms and to have that talent and that gift, it really sort of, it broke the barriers of what was
Yes.
happening. Because jazz at that time, I don't know the exact year, but jazz was not a music or a type of music that was really embraced by anyone other than the African American communities, right? It was something they thought of that was going to destroy, like similar to rock and roll, the devil's music. But
Yeah.
now there were a couple of things in the just thought-provoking questions, and I want to ask you just one question. What do you think Bonhoeffer would say with the way the world is now? Like what would be one of his thought-provoking questions? Like I love the one, do you believe that we can defeat our enemies by loving them? Like
Yeah,
just to
well,
think about that in the film. What do you think he would say?
he was a very polite man. He grew up in a very good family. He had very manners. He was very polite, very civil, and had integrity. I mean, integrity was very important in him. Whatever he did, it's truthful. So he was true to himself and true to God, and so uh, you know, that's a message for today. Is that you have someone who is truthful, that you can rely on, that you know that what you hear from him is true, that he's not double-faced, if you will, as they say. So I think that's I don't know.
And that's a message for today, is if you're a Christian, to be a real Christian.
A real Christian.
You meet people that they say they're Christians, but then, they don't have a lot of integrity, or they're just in name only. And one of the big messages, there's a lot of what he says, he was civil. There's a lot of incivility today. So we have a lot of enemies today, and loving them doesn't mean you don't confront. It doesn't mean you just lay down and go, I don't want a confrontation. I want to hurt his feelings. I want to love him. I mean,
In fact, sometimes loving them is to confront them. I mean, if you love them, you confront them. You speak the truth and confront them. That's loving them. That's real love. But anyhow, yeah.
And Jesus said some very tough things to people. He stood up, and the famous scene is in the temple when he scourged, takes out a whip. I think there isn't just one way to be a Christian. This is one of the things that Dietrich struggled with a lot, is finding the will of God in every situation. Otherwise, how could he, a man of peace, have joined a plot to kill the head of state? And that is a loving act, and probably what he would think, because he was saving so many lives. He really struggled with that. And in the end, he said, he gave that, when he's being arrested, he gave that little thing, and that's what he thought. If a man was driving a car, mowing down women and children, would you just bandage the wounds of the women and children and try to help them? Or would you actually try to grab the wheel from this man and stop him from killing people? So, and he said, but I will, if I am wrong and I've taken guilt upon myself, he knew that, I will appeal to the mercy and the grace of God. Wow. So we have to struggle with, as a Christian, when do we, if we're in a school, on school board, when do we say, no, that is not correct to teach in our school? Or when do we say it, there's just not one way, then we become like the strident Christian. It's really, the Holy Spirit is very nuanced. And in some cases, he's saying, shout and fight and pick up your sword. And in some cases, he's saying, by the sword, I mean the word of God. And he's saying sometimes, lay down your life for that person. Turn the other cheek. Let him smack you again. It's Christianity is not for the faint of heart. It's not, oh, he's such a loser, he found Christ. It's to do it right, to really walk step by step.
Wow. That is something I personally do struggle with, as I avoid conflict. And I was just telling my wife before I came up, I was listening to somebody this morning, and I said, it was the exact message that I needed to hear. Because, and like you said too, Emmanuel, like, just because when you love someone, you should be able to confront them. But I like to avoid conflict. But I learned I need to be tougher, not meaner. Just because I avoid conflict, Sometimes you really need to address conflict. So Emmanuel, you just one last question. I was thinking this, produced movies. I've done a lot, just like not as much as you, of course, but you've run, huge successful businesses. When you were getting into the producing world, right? Were you able to apply any of sort of the business background, or did you realize how different producing films are versus running one of your
Yes.
$1 billion companies?
Yes, no, absolutely. But the other thing is that it's the discipline and the fact that, make sure that people delivered on their promise, what they promised that they would deliver. That's what you do in business, is that you have an objective.
In the movie world, that's very different though, right?
I know, but I kept, and also following the numbers, the accounting is very important because, and I try to focus on that. I mean, I wish I'd done a little bit more because, I spent a lot of time in accounting and balance sheets and cash flows and what have you. And I just started to monitor and try to save money, make sure that we stick to the budget, because people, a lot of the artistic people don't worry about budget. Let's do this, let's do that, without any,
Yes.
they never focus on cost. They don't.
That's me. I'm the creative side.
So
I know. I have a creative guy named Mark that does that. He only thinks about, the creativity, doesn't think about the cost.
The
So
cost.
Ann and I would fight.
We had a lot of fights because of that.
We'd have dinner and relax, and then we'd come to a compromise every night.
But also, and people like directors like the scene and they want to make a bigger scene, but it costs more money. So I had to try to rein in the appetite of a lot of people. And I think that's the fact that I was a businessman enabled me to do that. If I had not had that skill, I don't know if this movie would have cost or would have been made at all. I mean,
he had to work in 3 currencies too. It's complicated.
Oh
We shot in Belgium, Ireland, so that's euros and pounds. UK, we had pounds, and then we had dollars.
Yeah.
So
anyhow, that was just different. But that helped me. My sort of background helped me in managing that aspect, the finances of the movie, which is critical, as you might imagine. I'm sure.
Are you thinking about doing another film, or are you moving on?
well, this one took 12 years. I think they always tell us, this is our first film. I mean, we only did it because we thought, this should be a movie. And we didn't really say, we're going to enter the world of producing. We literally just said, let's just get a script and then give it to somebody. And that never happened. We were never able, we stewarded it, and it took 7 years to do a script. So we were and it was a calling. We began to see it was a calling from God. He was not going to let us give it to somebody.
Oh, I agree. That's how I felt with the Capodanno. I kept putting it off, and every day I'm just being, woken up by this voice. Got to do the movie. Got to do the movie.
Well, there you are. God is calling you.
And Emmanuel, every time I tell the story, I try to I don't have any sort of emotional connections. I'm telling it, no enthusiasm, just to see. And people are like, "Oh my God, what a story!" And I'm like, "Oh," so I know it's from God. And my partner said, "Are you ready for this?" And I said, "I don't know if I'm ready for this. I've done a lot of projects, but not at the caliber of a film like you did, Bonhoeffer, or the film that we're trying to do." So really commend you for all the hard work and the amount of time and effort you put into this.
Well, praise God.
I think for your film, just try to keep creative control. And so whatever control they want, make it in your contract that is collaborative, but you have final say, that you will
final cut. I mean, this is the most important thing. You as a producer, if you're involved in that, you need to have final cut.
At least on
and it's going to be very clear in the contract and the agreement. We had final cut.
At least on the script. Now, if they want to film it in the mountains, if they say this scene should not be in the city, it should be in the mountains, but make sure that you have that creative control. And they're going to try to wrestle it away from you.
So. Oh, I know. I could see that already. I could see that. So tell us, how can people find out more about the film? The film's being released. Is it November 22nd?
22nd, yes.
22. Please go see it, because it's important if you want to see more movies like this for people to show up opening weekend. That's important.
That's the key.
Hollywood only looks at box office, for the opening weekend. And we really feel that you should see these things in community, not alone on your iPhone, But anyway, you can go to Angel Studios. They're distributing it. You can Google on, Bonhoeffer the movie or something. Now everything's starting to come up. You can buy pre-sales now. You can get, they're in mostly you know, AMC theaters, Regal. Yeah. So it's the weekend before Thanksgiving.
Well, I
And
advise
it's critical. It's critical to get people to see it then, because that's a vote of confidence for the you know, for the cinemas, and they will keep it going throughout. We want to keep it going throughout Christmas.
No, and I agree. I like you said, we talk about how we need more faith-based films, more religious films. We need to support them, right?
Exactly. That's
Like
how
I
you,
argue about religious freedom, right? We talk about religious freedom, but then
right.
most people
Right.
don't get up and vote. So we need to support films like this. So listen, guys, I hope you enjoyed today's episode of Walk in Faith. Always remember you have the ability to inspire and evangelize through words and actions. God bless you. And I want to know, after you see the film, I want to know about some of the thought-provoking questions, and I want to really know how you reflected on this film the way that I did during this interview. Thank you so much, guys. Camille, Emmanuel, thank you very much for your time.
Pleasure.
It was a pleasure.